Is this working? There we go. Okay, everybody, we're going to get started. Are we streaming? Yeah? Okay. Welcome to the June Gamedev meeting of the International Game Developers Association, Twin Cities chapter. My name is Beth Korth. I am the chair of IGDATC and your host for this evening. How am I supposed to advance the slides? I forgot. Oh, Trent, click. So this is an idea of what to expect this evening. The intro is this. I will try and keep it short and sweet so that we can get right to the good stuff. We'll have some community plugs and announcements is part of the intro. And then, if you have any questions or anything that you want, if you mention IGDATC board on the Discord, somebody will hopefully tell us. The presentations tonight, I think we've got them out of order on here because I wasn't sure who was going to go first, but Branson is on standby, going to redo the MDev talk that they gave. Late 90s style in the modern era, radical. That sounds fun. And then we're going to follow it up with Reese, and they will be doing business with Reese, values at the discussion table. And then post-meeting, we will find somewhere to hang out, and it's probably going to be Applebee's. Next slide. Does it work? Does it work? I just got to click? Oh, I think I skipped one. How do I go back? This way? Yay! Okay, so our meetings are open to everyone. We want everyone to feel safe and comfortable here. So if there is any problems, you can let one of the board members know, or email us at igdatwincities@gmail.com, which I think is in our policies linked there. So this is the board. We're volunteers, so sorry if, it's not exactly perfect tonight, but hopefully we're doing an okay job. But we can't do it alone. We have a bunch of really great volunteers. This could be you. And if it is you and I haven't put you up there, I am so sorry. Please send me a photo so I can add you to our volunteer slide. And if you no longer want to volunteer, you can also let me know and I'll remove you. These are our regular schedule of events. Perhaps you were here last Wednesday for Devs Play Games. Tonight we are doing the Game Dev meeting, also here. And then the third Wednesday we do playtest at Noble Robot. And the fourth Wednesday is our VR HCI meetup at REM 5. We also have special interest meetup groups, which the Women in Games will be meeting this Saturday. Oh, Dale's got an announcement. I'm so excited. Come on up, Dale. It doesn't matter. I'm excited.
If it is nice outside, which right now the forecast says it will probably rain, but if it's nice, we're gonna go to a restaurant with a patio and hang out. But if it's raining, we're gonna be at Noble Robot, but there will be pie for all your women and non-binaries out there.
There's always pie. Yes. All right. And there is an update to the People of Color get-together. We have a new host. We are still having the event on the 4th Saturday this month at Noble Robot. Dakari Hollins has hopped in to give us a hand, and he's not here tonight to say hi to, but he's back on that other slide. So you know what to look for if you go to the POC get-together. Oh, and Steven's going to be there. Yay, Steven! So we also have channels for your games and projects on our Discord. If you want to set one up for your project, you can request a channel like that. And we also have swag, yo, which I'm not wearing tonight. Is anybody? Nobody's repping IGDATC? No, I'm just kidding. Like 8 people have shirts, but none of them wore tonight. Plugs and announcements. Oh, Mark, there is an update for the Twin Cities playtest. Nope, people can read.
Yep. Twin Cities playtest has been the only event in our collection that has still required masks at events up to now. But right now, as you can see, the US test positivity rate is very, very low. And in Minnesota in particular, the percentage of hospitalization for COVID, the percentage of beds, is under 1%. So that's essentially the threshold in which I am now comfortable no longer requiring masks at playtest. Thanks to everyone. I don't think I got a single complaint the whole year and a half past when we stopped, when we started doing in-person events again. So thanks to everybody. But that does not mean that it's free carte blanche to cough on everybody. Please, if you're not feeling well, still stay home. The pandemic is not over, but it's in a much, much better place now. I'm much more comfortable personally, and the event that I host at Noble Robot there, which is very crowded, is now safe for that. We still have masks on site, so if you want to come and that makes you feel more comfortable, we will always have extra masks for people. That's still an important part of our location. So that's that. Not much more to say about that, but if that's kept you from coming, because you don't want to be in a mask for 3 hours in a crowded room, like I totally get that. So that might be a reason to stop by if you haven't. But we'll find some room for you between everybody else's shoulders.
Thanks, Mark. And that's a great reminder. I know we don't say it anymore. We used to do it before every meeting, but if you are feeling ill, please don't come to the events. Just tune in on our YouTube channel. Is there anyone with a plug for something going on in the community that they would like to talk about now? And can someone check the Discord for me also? I will hum again. Nothing on the Discord? All right, perfect. Sorry, my son's here, he's giggling at me. So I put the presentations in wrong. Nope, go back. So, is Branson on the line? And can we switch over the stream so I can just turn this mic off and let him take over?
Hi there.
Hello.
All right. Let me know whenever you need me to switch over or start screen sharing, whenever you guys are ready for.
We're ready for you.
All right, perfect. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to make sure I get you guys looking at the right part of my presentation. Okay. Can somebody confirm that there is indeed a TV with static on your screen right now?
Yep, we are good to go.
Okay, cool. Give me 1 second. I got to get over to my information and we will be good to go. All right, cool. I'll wait for a thumbs up from you guys and then I'll get started here.
Yep, we're good to go.
Okay, cool. Well, welcome everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank IGDA, your guys' chapter here for having me. I'm very grateful to be here to talk with you guys today. Second, I'd like to thank everybody who worked on this game with me, Mariah Candle, Evan DiGiacomo, and Govin Hudson for helping me make a lot of this stuff. And a big thank you to Govin for helping me kind of tailor everything in here. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you guys for coming today to come listen to me. I feel so honored that you all joined me today and asked me to be a part of your, your chapter and your group to kind of just like give you a little bit of info on what I've been working on with my group over the past couple years. So let's get started here then. Okay, so who am I? I'm Branson Mariola. I'm from Ohio, yay, Midwest, but like not really. I attended Kent State University, graduated 2 years ago with a degree in animation and game design. I work with an indie studio called Fine Spot Interactive, along with 3 other Kent State alumni, still say students all the time. And we've been working on a 3D collectathon platformer inspired by the late 90s style of 3D games called QB Botanical Breakout. While working on this game, it's really led me and my group down a path to learn more about the visual style and the development of an art style, especially one that is based on previous eras. I'm super passionate about learning and game design, working with others and stuff. So if you have any questions or input, feel free to message me towards the end of the presentation and we can go over some stuff. So let's kind of jump right into it, right? So what's the point, dude? What's the point? Why should I even care about old games? They're old. They're in the past, right? They were limited. Well, there's a bunch of reasons, right? So why care about it and why try to emulate the look of this, right? So the PS1 and N64 are super popular right now. They are at their peak nostalgia. People who have played these consoles in their youth are now in their mid to late 20s, 30s even. And the market is super open, similar to the 8-bit boom of the 2000s and 2010s with games like Shovel Knight, Mega Man 10, Cave Story, Fez, basically any 8 or 16-bit game of that time. Those games kind of pandered to the passions of the people um, who had played those games growing up. Um, and they kind of looked and played similar to how you would remember or how those people remembered the games of their youth, even if they didn't truly represent the limitations of that era. Um, to gain a better understanding and understand a little bit more, or sorry, and learn more about this era is another reason why you might want to emulate it or why you might care about it, right? Um, there's so many skills and systems and stuff from the workflow of prior generations that learning can really improve your workflow and the way you approach modeling, texturing, animation, coding, anything like that. And finally, the last reason you, in my opinion, one of the last reasons you might want to emulate the style is to pay homage to like a past era. Learning about game development, we can really pay like homage to games of our youth, um, even if it's not really my youth. Sorry to do this to some of you, but I was actually born the day Ocarina of Time came out in America. Sorry to make some of you feel kind of old, but even though I didn't grow up with these games, I always felt a strong connection to them and to the art style because it was just such a unique and mesmerizing era. Um, I didn't end up playing a lot of these games until or like late 90s games, Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Metal Gear Solid. I didn't really play a lot of those until I was a teenager or a young adult. But I can still respect what they brought to the table, and it kind of captured me later in college, which led me to kind of propose this idea of making a late 90s inspired game. So what makes this era so visually unique? I'm sure most of us can just look at it and notice that it looks different, but what really, when you break it down, what really kind of makes it different? So honestly, it's just technical limitations. The limitations are just so important for that era and to really nail the style of a 90s game. The consoles that these games are being released on had very limited storage, very limited processing power, and even you can see it here by just like, I'm going to do a little comparison here. The PlayStation 1 had 2 to 3 megabytes of combined RAM. And just so you know, I'm an artist, not like a technical guy. So this is whatever I found on Google. Feel free to argue with me about it later if it's wrong. The PS1 had 2 to 3 megabytes of combined RAM. The PS5, or sorry, PS1, PS5 has 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is about an 8,000% increase. And of course, that is like a almost 30-year difference, right? But or like 25. But still, just from seeing that, you can kind of understand how different um, these old games had to be. The developers of these games were forced to make creative decisions based heavily on the limitations of the consoles they were working with. It affected the type of work they could produce creatively. You had low quality textures, low poly models, limited game mechanics, small maps, basic lighting, jagged or shaky environments. And you can kind of see here that on the right you have some technical limitations. On the left you can see what kind of comes from that. So on the right, you have rendering, Z buffer issues, and memory limits. Where on the left, it's your animation. Even like the amount of color you can have on screen was limited. Your modeling was limited, lighting and textures. We're going to get into that a little bit more here. Um, so here are two models. I like these a lot because they're just such a good example of what you can do with such a small amount of tries. Um, so, due to the low amount of RAM on the consoles, they could not display or cache much information at once, and the amount of polygons on screen was limited to somewhere between 10K and 30K per scene. That one's kind of shaky. I couldn't find an exact number on it, but it's somewhere around there. Squall and Crash here actually use really small textures, and they barely use any polygons. You can see here that Crash's textures on the far right are probably less than like 128 pixels by 128 pixels. It's very, very simplistic. Even Squall here on the left they use a couple different texture maps for him, but they're all super, super small. In comparison, here is a model from the PS5 game Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. It's 300,000 tries. So compare that to one of these guys here. Like the amount of tries that's probably in like one bolt of this guy's body could make up an entire character. Um, and that doesn't include, and that's just one character. That's not the world or NPCs or objects or guns or anything in the scene. It's just one character. Characters in the late 90s usually were limited between 500 tries to 1,000. So farther, deeper down the rabbit hole, I talked a little bit about it earlier, but the textures are super important, right? So the models are super limited because they have to have low polys and they have to be kind of um, constricted with what they can really do. But then you get to the textures. So in these retro games, textures were like super limited, like super, super limited. Storage was low. The consoles couldn't really handle large file sizes. Textures are forced down to a resolution of about 256 by 256. Usually that was the max that some games would do for the PS1 and the N64. As you can see here, most developers went even smaller to optimize the textures, and the resolution of the screen was so low that you really wouldn't be able to tell. Um, you could just like kind of like get away with doing even smaller and smaller stuff because the highest resolution TVs back then were nowhere near enough to show you what was really going on with these super tiny textures. So the way this kind of worked was texture libraries were given to developers, right? And these texture libraries offered thousands of photos that the studio would buy from a company, right? So you see this disc on the right. So these were used by Nintendo. So what they would do is when a artist needed to make a texture, right? They would get the disc into their computer, scour through all of these different textures, pick one that they like, and then edit it and use it in the game. If you want to see some information that's really interesting, you can scan this QR code, and I believe it takes you to a YouTube video that talks about some people have been finding a lot of these textures and texture discs out there. Um, so it was really cool because when you have such a small like size to make a texture, right? You could draw everything by hand, or you could start with a photo and kind of go from there. Oftentimes, the photos were higher quality than the games could handle. In the next slide, I'll show you how artists kind of got around that. Oh, I guess it's the well, a little out of order here. We'll get back to that how they fix that. And then lighting. So we've gone over modeling and texturing, and now lighting. Real-time lighting is amazing technology that we have today. You could put a light anywhere, and it reacts apparently or accordingly with a character, with NPCs, with environmental effects. It's very cool. But in the 90s, this could not happen. Vertex lighting was the dominant way to light your game. It works essentially, and like I said, I'm more of an artist and like a technical person, but to my understanding, vertex lighting was like the dominant way to light your game because it didn't use up as much processing power, but it would give you like a effect of lighting. So the way it works is um, adding these lights throughout your game changes the texture actively, and then it bakes into that. So on the left, you can see it's a bit more like polygonal, and it doesn't look as good or as smooth, but it's way less processing power, and it's just affecting the texture. So if a character walks in front of it, it's not going to the game won't have to calculate how the light hits them and reflects off of them. It's really cool, and it's very difficult to kind of get that to work in the modern era, but it is possible. Um, so you have all these options, right? But you're like, how do we do that now, right? Because all I've really done is tell you some methods that these artists used back in the day, but we don't really know how to do that now. So let's go over that really quick. So during my time working on QB Botanical Breakout, I really enjoyed delving into textures and trying to create a lot of seamless textures or model textures in a very traditional way, kind of how it would have been done in the 90s. One of my favorite ways to emulate the workflow that used to be used, which was obviously the developers would get a disk and look through it, find a photo they like, and then use that. One of my favorite ways to do that now is using Unsplash. If you haven't heard of Unsplash, it is mostly a free photography website. So people take photos, upload them there, and usually almost all of them are free to use under the Creative Commons license. We have so many more options in the modern era than just buying a $70 disc from Philips that has 5 photos of wood on it, right? Like we have the whole internet. Um, it is Unsplash is super useful for finding any weird type of thing that you need. I mean, I found like anything from like rusted metal to like the underside of a playground for it, with it. And then here's kind of a little demonstration of what I like to do when making textures. I primarily aim for a PlayStation 1 style when creating textures. So I start by finding an image that fits what I'm looking for my scene. In this case, I wanted to make like a metal grate. So I found this metal picture on the left. And then I crop it down. And then if you don't use any post processing in your game, what I like to do is posterize the image, and then to kind of limit the color and emulate that kind of late 90s look. Um, so you pick this part that you like, you crop it down, you posterize it and do some editing. And then I like to add low lights, highlights, and shadows wherever you need just to make the image look better. These games, if you're familiar with like the modern workflow for games, these games didn't use metalness, roughness, and metallic. Or sorry, metalness, roughness, and height maps or anything like that. It was just base color for most of them. So artists had to consider where these assets were being used and kind of do the shadows and lighting before they went into the game. Um, and like I said, if you are using post processing, you can skip some of these steps because it can make the game look a lot better. So then after you have that, you're in your image program, you add the shadows and highlights, and then you're kind of done. One really fun thing to do is if you're familiar with using any type of height maps or normal maps or anything, baking that into the models will make your textures look incredibly good, and very era accurate and give you a lot more depth too with this kind of stuff. So then we're on to models, right? So we know how to make textures, but what about models? Characters should probably be under 1,000 tries. Objects, like any props in the game, should be under 100, ideally under like 50, unless they're big important props. And levels, couldn't find a great, couldn't really find like a great number on that, but I would say around 10,000 tries is good. Um, you can use stuff in the top right. I have a picture from my group mate Govin. He created this kind of like Bible for our art style, and thanks again for that for letting me use this, Govin, because it's super good. One of the things he kind of points out is like when you're making a model, you really can't overthink it. Like if something can be reduced, you need to reduce it. So over here we have like some type of fence or propeller thing, and instead of using a bunch of models to represent it, you could just use 2 planes, and it goes down like almost over 200 polygons. Um, if you need to exceed your poly limit, you can, but try not to go too far because those items will stand out. Even if you're making like, I don't know, like a trash can and it's 500 polygons and then everything else in the game is, or 500 tries and everything else in the game is like 200 or 300, it's going to stick out and it will be noticeable. Characters, you can kind of go higher poly on because like realistically, as long as you have the right post processing and you're using the right textures, I think you can really make it work. I like trying to keep the worlds pretty simple though because I think it makes it look way more authentic. Um, so here's another thing that you can kind of do with this. If you're using Maya or Blender, I recommend hardening the edges for your models. Um, I don't really know what the percentages are for either of them, but all it does is change the shading information. And I'll say it for the third time. Not a technical guy, I am an artist, but I'm pretty sure that all this setting does is change the parameters of how the engine will have light reflect off of your item or your object, and also how it kind of looks in engine. It doesn't seem to be that much harder on the processing. Uh, but the cool thing about these 2 spheres is the one on the left and the right have the same amount of polygons, but the one on the left obviously looks more era accurate. yeah, it basically just changes the way that the engine looks at your model. And then this is kind of like a guiding philosophy that my professor in college kind of instilled in us when we were making this game. We had a lot of discussion about how faithful we should make our game when we were working on it, or even just how faithful to make other stuff. We actually had a class in college where um, student groups would be tasked with creating games based on different consoles. And one of the things the professor would say was remake it uh, the way they remember it, not the way it was. Right. Um, my professor's name was Chris Totten. He actually just released a game called Kudzu. It's on like Switch and Steam and everywhere. So go check it out. It's a Game Boy. It's like an original Game Boy game. It's super cool. Um, we had like this conversation about one time like, well, should we have dual analog support because our game is based on late 90s games, and yes, it's a platformer, but some of them didn't have analog support. And our professor basically said, remake the game the way people remember it, not the way it was. You can make some can you can make some um, you can like change the way that some things work to make it more accessible for the modern era, having good camera controls, having analog input. um, it's okay to do that, having accessibility features. If you think that it's going to make the game better, then it's probably a good idea for you to include it, within reason, of course, because you're trying to remake this game and make people feel like they're playing a game from their youth. But you don't want them to remember all the bad things about their youth. You don't want them to remember how jagged the cameras used to be, or how hard the text was to read, or how difficult it was to navigate the game with only using 4 directions. Um, we had a we also like talked about some things like adding extra resolution and polys when needed. Um, every game and every asset has different problems and styles to it, so it's kind of a case by case basis. But I always think it's important to remember if you're making something that is retro, that you try to remake it the way people remember it. Now the question is like, does anybody really do this, right? Like, who's doing this? Well, we do. Um, Here's some screenshots from our GameCube Botanical Breakout. We've been working on this game for 2.5 years now, I believe, and development's going strong. It's on itch, and I believe there is a link posted to it somewhere on the Discord. Um, Working with my group has been an amazing opportunity to kind of not only learn how to work in a group, but also like learn how to do something completely different that none of us had ever tried before. Um, we've basically restarted development a couple times because of how we just want our game to keep looking more accurate and better and better and better. Um, and I think it's been for the best because our game from a year ago is unrecognizable to the one we have today. We keep getting more accurate and saving on polygons and saving on processing and getting better textures. It's been a really great journey, and I'm happy that I've been able to be a part of that. And if you guys want to check it out, like I said, the game is on itch. But here's the question: does anybody successful do this? Right? Rude, but yeah, totally. Um, if you check out this link here, this leads to a game called Greek Tragedy, made by, I believe it's Arbor Studios. Um, Arbor Studios? I'll have to check. Just scan the QR code and go check it out. It's You can download it on itch. It's a horror game that looks like a PS1 game, and you can see definitely with their game that they remade it the way people remember it, but not the way it really was, because they add a lot of quality of life features that you wouldn't really have in the PS1 era, but it feels so authentic, and they did an amazing job with it. Um, and here's some more games. We have Frogun and Macbat 64, both really unique games, also amazing inspiration for what we were working on. All these games have different approaches to this style, but they all accomplish the same idea: remaking games the way people remember them, but not entirely faithfully. And that's really it. I took you through the workflow that they used to use to make games, and now you know how to do it for yourself. Um, I appreciate you guys all being here, coming to this. I'm so happy to be able to speak with all of you fine people. Um, if you want any more info on anything, feel free to message me. I'm in this Discord now, so you can just message me whenever. If you're coming to Ohio anytime soon, GDEX is happening in Columbus. Come on by. I assume I will be there, maybe doing the same talk. I'm not really sure. Don't tell anybody. Thank you to IGDA, and thank you to Sam Baseman for inviting me and setting this up. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you guys all have a good day. Thank you for having me be a part of this. I really appreciate it.
Woohoo! We'll toss it over to Q&A for a quick second if anybody has any questions, comments, anything like that, anything for the good of the cause.
Let's hear it.
Let's see here.
I've got one. So you're born in the 90s and you're doing a 90s art style? What's that about?
I know, right?
Nostalgia? I don't
Yeah.
think so.
So, like I said, I didn't grow up with these games, but I did kind of start playing them when I was in like my teen years, and it's always been really unique to me. I was born in '98, so like I didn't know anybody who had an N64 growing up or a PS1, but I got them when I was a little bit older, and it always kind of enamored me that like this era between like pixel art and 3D existed because I grew up with a GameCube, so like it was really neat for me to like go back and experience all of that. So it's kind of nostalgia, but like not really.
So obviously you've been going back and kind of recreating these games with basis of nostalgia. What are your thoughts on like Studio Bluepoint and things like that, where the Activision recently came out, I think, with the Crash Bandicoot trilogy and the remake of Spyro and things like that, where they're doing the exact opposite of what you're saying to do and actually like rebuilding it with today's assets. What are your kind of thoughts on like that development? Is that something that you'd like to transition to at some point, or?
I think what's really interesting about those remakes is that even though they actively change like the visuals, the music, a little bit of the gameplay systems, they still tried to maintain as much as possible from the original, and I think that kind of says something. Um, I don't know. I don't think it's like revisionist history or anything, right? To be like, yeah, this game looks kind of strange and we need to remake it. I think it's a really cool idea because even if the art style isn't there, right? If the art style is changed, I wish they could bring it forward, but it's kind of hard to. I think that the idea that they want to bring these games back in any form at all is really, really cool. It shows that there's obviously a demand for these games, and there's there's a demand for it, and there's a market too. I think that it's kind of up to preference, right? Like what you want to play. So, for example, I've seen some games, and even our game has options for changing the visuals. So we have an N64 style and a PS1 style in our game. And the reason we added that was because we felt like it might be easier for some people to play it with like clear graphics and a little bit like less jagged look to it. I think that what those companies are doing is really cool. Being able to remake, not only remake old games, but also continue a series that's been not dormant or dead, but like kind of not doing too much for a long time is really unique. And I'm happy to see that it's happening. Um, Same thing with Nintendo releasing the Super Mario All Stars 3D All Stars pack. Um, Even though they didn't remake those games, they reintroduced them and brought them back. So any acknowledgement and like recreation or re-representation of those games, I think is a good idea. Do I think the art style holds up? Do I think everything kind of works with it? I think it's up to interpretation, but I will say I played like through all of the all of those games when they were re-released, and I didn't even play a lot of them as a kid, and I still had a really good time. So I think that that kind of stuff is good for the industry. Reminds people where they came from.
Hi there. So I have a question about your geometry workflow. So you talked about,
Uh-oh.
okay. You talked about, the more limited geometry in terms of poly count of older games and then newer ones. When you talk about how the geometry in those games was made, something interesting comes up, which is that, take games like Doom or Quake, the workflow to create that geometry was often very limited in what you could represent. Like in Doom, it's just straight up and down walls. But in exchange, the workflow is actually pretty efficient because, like in the case of, say, Doom, you're just laying down lines. You're not really operating three-dimensionally when you're making the geometry, or for Quake, you're just really quickly dragging things around, moving the bounds of shapes, and they automatically get textured with the appropriate scale and this and that. You're never touching UVs directly. So where I'm going with this is, okay, if you go ahead and make low poly, retro-inspired geometry with Blender, say, you actually have a whole lot of more tedious stuff that you have to deal with yourself because you're using a more powerful tool. So I'm curious where you landed on what tooling to use and how to try to make that workflow of making this low poly geometry as efficient as you could.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point to bring up that, yeah, there was like a whole separate facet of 3D during that time. It was like the 2D, 3D stuff. So when I started with this, it was me and my group mates in January of 22, I think we were working on it. We had like a whole month of just trying to figure out exactly how to do it. And you are 100% right. Like sometimes working with limitations actually creates more issues and more hurdles. You don't know how long it took us to get vertex lighting to work in Unreal Engine. Yes, we make this game in Unreal. I think it'd be easier if we made it in Unity, but we all were more comfortable with Unreal at the time. There's a lot of hurdles when you go backwards like that. My workflow and the way that we kind of do it is model everything in, well, we used to do Maya. Now we've moved almost everything over to Blender. Modeling there and then kind of I mean, it's pretty similar workflow to like a modern asset. The only difference is a lot of it's in the texturing. Because when you're texturing, you have to use a smaller texture size, so you kind of have to learn how to work within that. But you also have to, we use like custom dither processing, custom dither filters in like Substance Painter to help us. While it is more work in one way, it's less in another because if you are making a game that's, a modern game that's like 4K or 1080p, everything's like you know, hundreds of hundreds of like tries or whatever. You have to be really meticulous with how everything looks. But in our game, if you just want to throw a wood texture on something, throw a dither on it, it's not as noticeable. It works in reverse too, because if you want to add small details to stuff, you're basically not able to unless you create a whole new texture map for it. It's kind of been all over the place, to be honest, trying to figure out if it's like easier or not. I think that the modeling is more challenging but fun. The texturing is definitely more challenging, but it's a lot simpler. And lighting has been kind of its own battle because we basically had to rip the entire lighting system out of Unreal and then bring it back in with whatever we wanted. I hope that kind of answers your question. It's harder and easier, but it is rewarding to learn something new like that.
Yeah. We have a question from our YouTube live stream from Josh Anthony. Your screenshot looks like it's in 4:3 resolution. How do you handle presenting 4:3 on widescreens, and how did that decision impact your game design?
Good question. I kind of shy away from some of some of the stuff because I'm not entirely technically inclined. So that'd be a better question for a coder who does a lot of this stuff. But I think in our game, the way we like to do 4:3 is just making it a windowed view. I've tossed around the idea of having like borders. If you've ever played like an emulator or like any type of like Nintendo Switch online game that's from an older console that's standard def, what they do is they'll just put a border around the left and right side of the screen to make that 4:3 work. We were able to, or our coder was able to make it so that all of the menus and stuff work effectively in 4:3 and 16:9. So it's been pretty interesting being able to like do both. It was definitely like something that was very important to us from the beginning is to have 4:3 as an option because it just feels more authentic. To be honest, I can't think off the top of my head how our 4.3 looks in like a widescreen view. But we definitely made it so that everything was uh, scalable because it was really important. At conventions and stuff, we actually play the game on a CRT in 4x3, and it looks great. It looks very era accurate, which makes me think that if you play it, I think if you play it on a widescreen monitor, we just have black bars on the side. But like I said, I can't remember off the top of my head. Thanks for asking.
And then I've got, I think, what might be our last question. I'm not seeing any other hands, but I'm curious, as you're trying to emulate like an older style and using newer tools, there are obviously like pros and cons with it. And like you are given more affordances when you're creating your game, like from just set dressing the level to like how the assets are implemented and all that. I'm curious if there are any difficult decisions you guys had throughout development so far as a group that like where you had to basically choose between authenticity or the like modern like playability of the game or like conveniences that the engine afforded you, and I'm curious which ways those maybe went on those decisions and or how you
Sure.
maybe used more current like tools of the game engine to replicate like retro aspects of games.
Yeah. Give me one sec. Let me think. I know I already mentioned the lighting. That one is like a constant battle. Um, like I said, we're using Unreal. Unreal already has a lighting system built into it. It's very advanced. It's beautiful. It's nice. You can put anything in Unreal and it'll look good. You could put a default cube in Unreal and make it look like it's, like the best thing you've ever seen. Um, that's been really tough. And having that conversation with the group, like, well, what do we do? Do we like, do we like rip all the lighting out, make something new, or do we bring it back? There was that one kind of textures kind of were rough for a while. Like I said, one of our coder, Govin, he created like a little Bible of how to make the texture work look good. Um, I think one of the hardest things in relation to like modern stuff has been trying to fight every program because every program wants everything to be smooth and high quality and stuff. Um, 3D modeling has been okay, I think. Like it hasn't been too rough, but texture wise and lighting wise, that's been really hard to get to work. Um, our textures, like I swear every 8 months we create brand new textures for a bunch of stuff because we just keep finding new ways to make it look better. I'll give you a good example. If you're using Substance Painter and you have a 128 by 128 texture or 256 by 256, it automatically smooths everything, and it's really difficult to work with. So we had to import a dithering filter just to make it so that um, we're able to even like make things look pixelated or not smeared or like mushy. Um, Fighting back against that has been tough. Um, I think that's about it. Animations have been okay. I was gonna say animations, but you just make the rig a little bit differently. You make the model a little bit differently, and it scales and it works perfectly fine. But trying to it, as much as the programs kind of cause problems for us, usually the biggest problem is trying to break the idea of making high quality, perfect, high poly assets and stuff like that. I think that's more of the problem. As much as the programs can get in the way, a lot of the time our own heads get in the way, and we kind of want to make things perfect and awesome. But then you realize you're working with a 256 by 256 texture or a 500 try model, and there's not much you can do with it. And sometimes just letting it go and working with the limitations really adds to the authenticity of the game, the model, or the texture.
That's cool. I have a question too, sort of related to that.
You're good. What's up?
When you chose to do Substance Painter, I was wondering what made you decide to keep certain programs that are new to use them in this process, because I would think that maybe, like, because it's definitely using a new generation tool for something that's overkill. So what made you decide to still use things like Substance Painter instead of just like hand painting it in Photoshop, for instance?
Good question. The overkill thing definitely applies to a lot of things. And I'm going to say for me at least, because I it's more comfortability. I stuck with Substance Painter and we did Unreal out of comfortability. We did not need Unreal to make this game. We don't need Substance Painter. A lot of people in my group actually use things like Photoshop or Paint.net or other programs, Krita, to make the textures. And um, in doing that, sometimes their work is even better than mine using Photoshop, or sorry, not Photoshop, Substance Painter. The reason I use it is because I'm comfortable with it, but I'm not lying. I definitely take some of the textures out of Substance Painter and just bring them into GIMP or Photoshop and just edit them in there because it is easier. You're right. So yeah, out of comfortability, I stuck with some of the stuff, but most of my group members, especially the ones who create some really beautiful texture work, they're usually using Photoshop or a combination of, you know, they'll they'll bring up some photos in GIMP or Krita or Paint.net or whatever, and then they'll bring that into Substance Painter so you can see it apply to the model in 3D and actively mess with it, and then take that out and then put it back into another image editing program, and then bring it into the game. Um, we thought about using older systems for a while. Like I found some older versions of 3D modeling software, but we decided against using it because we're comfortable with what we know, Blender mostly. So just using that works out pretty well for us. Um, a lot of one of the hardest parts of all of this was trying to find like tutorials on how to learn how to do this stuff, and it's all in Blender or Substance or just Photoshop. But no, you're right. These things are you're absolutely right. These things are way overkill. And we only use them out of necessity at first. And then we kind of transitioned into using lighter programs like Photoshop or Paint.net.
Nice. Alrighty. I believe that's all of our questions. Oh, never mind.
What part of the process do you enjoy the most?
I wish I could say importing because that's the most fun part when you bring a model and a texture and stuff into the game and it just works. But obviously that's, not really part of it. So I am an asset creator like through and through. I love modeling and texturing. Like that is my jam. Absolutely. So for me, I would say modeling is fun, but sometimes it's a little shallow because some of these objects are kind of not to like degrade them or anything, but they're kind of easy to make because they're lower quality, or lower poly. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's hard. I think that the texture work is is the most rewarding, most fun part of it. Um, I really enjoy doing like hyper detailed, like super high resolution models and stuff. But it is nice to like just be like, oh, I can just make something that looks like fun and unique. I don't have to make something realistic and lifelike. I can make something like I just made like a beach chair recently, and it's just like it's like a dirt map over like 3 different layers of color, and it looks really good and cohesive with the rest of the game. So I would say texturing is really fun when it works, because sometimes it is just like it's like it's just like head to the computer, restarting 5 times, just staring right at the screen for an hour, just trying to make a piece of wood look right. Um, but any artist will experience that with anything they do. I think that texturing is my favorite part and the most rewarding. Oh, can I add one more thing to that? Here, this is gonna be campy, but it's for real. It's a true statement. I think my actual favorite thing, the most rewarding part of the game, is watching people play it because people light up and really react well when they try out the game at conventions and stuff. We haven't uploaded a demo in a while, so if you check out our itch page, whatever's on there is pretty old. But when we take it to conventions, people absolutely love the style, and just having people just be so passionate about something that we've worked on. I'm sure I can speak for most of the people on my team and saying like that's one of the most rewarding, best parts of the process is seeing people enjoy the game.
Cool. Right on. Well, thank you again for joining us, Branson. It's been wonderful to get to have you showing off your talk from MDev here. A huge thanks from everyone here. Wahoo! Round of applause.
Woo! Thank you guys. I appreciate you asking me to do this, and I unfortunately have to leave immediately, but I hope that the rest of the talks go well, and I'll see you guys probably at the next meeting then. I really appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, thank you so much again for joining us. See you around.
Yeah. See you guys.
Cool. Now we're going to be transitioning over to our second talk of the night. Our in-person star, Reese Valentine, will be giving us a talk, Values, with Reese. Sort of a, as I know, roundtable discussion kind of thing. Yes, go crazy for it. Oh. Woo! I'm not used to do it. Yeah. Yeah. Wahoo. Thank you for joining us. Cool. Cool. I don't know. They might.
Discord if you want to pull it up on the stream. Do you want me to put that on the screen? Yeah, okay. That's fine. Awesome. All right, hello. I'll let them pull up the mirror board. Present. All right, hi everyone. My name is Reese Valentine. I use they, them pronouns. 3 years ago now, I helped co-found a worker cooperative. We named it Amalor. We do digital media in general, and we do a lot of external like game development support. Our current project is, it's a game called Slappy Ball. It's a physics like multiplayer sports game. You are a literal like little cartoon hand, and you're playing volleyball with your buds, who are also hands, wearing various very silly outfits. And we have a secret project underway as well. And I was approached to, talk about worker cooperatives. It's something I'm very vocal about and something I'm really excited to share with people. But I thought that it would be really interesting to try to broaden it to be a more universal, like applicable conversation. So one thing that's really important with worker cooperatives is the cooperative's values. So when I say values, I am talking about like, you don't have to think of it like as this like beautiful manifesto that you write about communism. Like, no. We can think of it as just like, what do you value? It doesn't have to be anything super sophisticated or complicated. It is just understanding yourself and what you want from collaborating with other people. And I think it's absolutely critical, no matter like what sort of group that you're in. I think the funniest example I can give is, does anyone here play like, or has played MMOs, played with other friends, maybe even done some raiding? So honestly, has anyone played Baldur's Gate 3 with your friends? How annoying and frustrating is it to organize those things? And, making sure you meet on time, making sure people agree to the time commitment. So those are, fun activities. And in a way, whenever you start something like that, you are setting your values within that group. So for the classic example of you're playing an MMO and you're starting to getting into the more hardcore raid side of things, you need to, the classic example that I see is that are you a casual, mid-core, or hardcore group? So for casual players, their goal might not even be to beat it anytime soon. The schedule is way more flexible. Like, oh, hey, does anyone even want to play today? No? Okay, let's just like do something else. A mid-core group is, the schedule's a little bit more concrete, although there still is like, oh, well, I can't do that today because I got, rescheduled or whatever. and there's more of an expectation of like performance, of like, please try like do your best to get better at your role, at your job. And then there's hardcore groups where they might be playing every single day for a week until they get the like raid done, depending on how hard it is. And that's value setting, really. I mean, like, if you join a group where they're super casual and you want something that's more challenging or you expect more out of the other players, you hold different values than what everyone else has. So even something as simple as a fun activity with other friends, it's really important to understand what you want and what the other people want. Because without it, that's when conflicts start, right? I'm sure people have heard stories about toxic groups where, you know, if it's the opposite of like, if it's a group of more serious raiders and then there's the more casual player, that casual player getting like kind of ousted eventually, getting yelled at, like, how dare you not like be up to the same performance as everyone else, it can go poorly. And I think all those things can be solved with a proper, like, I like D&D has like session 0, right? The DM perfectly describes, okay, I want this game to be way more focused on combat than role playing, and like, you know, they set expectations up ahead of time. And that's, you know, that's all to limit conflict later and to make sure the people like buy in, know what they're getting into. So, I wanted to talk about values and value setting with y'all. So I guess, oh wow, I don't even have to ask a question. I have something from Dale.
When you helped co-found Amalur, did you have discussions specifically about values, and how explicitly were they about values, or were they just kind of like, this is what we want this company to be like?
Yeah, for us, we definitely talked about it in very explicit terms about values. I think it's really common to hear that and be like, okay, yeah, sure, you know, Disney says that they value their employees, but do they really? I think it's really easy to be cynical about this term, and I think it's totally okay. If you need to think of it as not values, but as just like boundary setting or whatever makes sense for you, because that's really what it is. So for Amalur, yeah, we still have that. It's ongoing. Every time we add a new potential business partner, we want to like, you know, talk to them. We want to get, and maybe they'll introduce something new that we hadn't previously considered, but it's like, oh wait, but we are kind of going towards that. One of the things that someone new introduced was the idea of just like really focusing and dismantling inherent like power hierarchies, and just like acknowledging that that can easily happen in a group of people, and trying not to let that like run us or whatever. And it's like, yeah, we were kind of going with that, and you feel really strongly about it, and you've really made us like think, oh yeah, that is worth working towards. Yeah.
Just quick clarification, when you say add a new business partner, do you mean a new member of the collaborative, or a new organization that your group was working with?
Yeah, so the way that worker cooperatives function is that, let's say we're hiring a new programmer. We will say explicitly whether that role will offer membership. And membership for a worker cooperative is actually becoming an equal owner of the business. So yeah, although there are some like external business partners that we work with, we're working with a group of like cooperatives and people who are like collectively minded, called Gamma Space. And I mean, they're not joining our cooperative necessarily, but we are working like really deeply with them on various projects, like contract work, or even potentially down the line working on just like game projects together. So I guess technically a little bit of both, but I was more referring to the idea of like, you know, you hire someone new, they go through the process, and they become an equal business owner.
Are we allowed to ask questions to the floor or just to you?
No, I mean, like, yeah, I'm hoping to, like, I'm interested to hear about, like, your stories about things. You can ask, you know, the group overall of the question. Yeah, this is a roundtable.
I was just gonna ask if what people's experience with like setting their own values and boundaries with respect to like the work that they do in their day to day. This I would imagine this would scale even to like, you know, hobbyists. Like what kinds of games you're working on, or how are you working on, how are you approaching that? I was curious how people approach that here. I'll speak for myself because I guess I did propose the question. It'd be kind of rude to just propose it without answering the question myself. I think like I'm kind of like constantly thinking about that, but I feel like my I value the flexibility to be able to work.
Yeah, flexibility is huge.
Yeah, to be able to work when I'm able to work and not when I have to work. Sometimes I have to work, and that's okay, but like, if I'm making that sacrifice, then I need to be working somewhere that I care about and not, and working on something that I care about and not something that is not that, I guess. So like, I don't want to work for a mobile game anymore. And I guess, but like, yeah, so that's like an example of like a value that I try to hold with my day-to-day work and why I decided to work at where I work now. But yeah, that's just me. Oh, yes.
Oh, perfect. We got 2 mics now.
Hey.
I would say I agree with that a lot, Stephen.
Okay.
I feel like when I'm looking for like work opportunities or like trying to figure out what I want to do as like a goal, I often will look for areas where it feels like it is like developing some set of skills for me that I am interested in learning, or it's in a type of work that I feel very passionate about furthering like a cause in.
Yeah.
So I definitely would agree. Like I struggle to get as motivated if it's just like some whatever job, which is not to be disparaging to people who work the job, but for me, I need to be like personally engaged in it.
Mhm.
Like even if it's like working in a kitchen, like if I'm doing interesting stuff, making interesting things, that usually will like call to me more than something that's very like mind off, like you're not really like learning much more that you can apply like outside of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like that extends to like, you can kind of tell when you like are trying to get hired somewhere. They're like a place's vibe, I suppose. You can kind of feel out that like this place might not really care about me as a person, and they really just want me to get the work done. And like, you know, that's fair, because like everybody got to get paid. And also, I don't know, video games take a lot of passion to work on sometimes, and sometimes it's valuable to not have that. To work at a place where you don't necessarily have to feel as driven or feel as attached to it. But yeah, anyways, sorry, I'm talking a lot.
No, you're good.
As far as my thought process goes, as far as that goes, I recently went from a job where I was in charge of an entire department to a job where I'm now just a standard engineer alongside a group of other engineers. A large part of that was because, I've never had a good experience with leadership or being the one in charge of a direction going somewhere. But the company I was at, like you said, really did not care about the department that I was a part of. And also, like just, if I'm being completely honest, a lot of the time it's kind of, in order to be able to have the time and the energy to put into the passion, like the video games and board games and things like that, you need to have a secure financial backing. And so I tend towards anything that will assuage my greed, which, yeah. That being said, there's something else to be said for, you can pay me whatever you want, but if I'm not able to work on my own side projects at the same time, like that has a serious mental defect. Like just, so balancing those two, the ability to have the passion because you have the time and energy, but also having the financial security to be able to go into that.
No, that's the biggest thing that values are supposed to like solve, basically, right? I had a really like sad conversation at GDC, at this past GDC. Someone was talking to me about how the only way that they were able to fund their studio was through financial opportunities that a lot of the members just were not morally okay with. And what eventually happened was the dissolution of the group. People left. So I think that's something that if the group had like this value setting session early on, you know, being in agreement, like, you know, what lines do you draw here? Then, you know, that might acknowledge like, maybe this financial opportunity is more an opportunity for the group to die, and it would have been able to be caught earlier on. Because yeah, people, if stuff goes against their values for too long, they leave. People aren't gonna put up with it. They don't wanna, they wanna work with like-minded people.
So you mentioned the Amalur is a co-op. What is the connection between being a co-op and putting values as like a core thing?
Yeah, so something with cooperatives is that they kind of come with this sounds negative. I'm just gonna say it, but I don't mean it negatively, I promise. But there is a baggage of, actually cooperatives come with 7 principles. And we can, you know, look at them as values. You know, one of them is cooperation among cooperatives. So the idea is that you should be motivated to assist and help out other cooperatives that are like-minded like you. Some of the other things is like concern with community. You don't want to just like extract money and value from your community. You want to give back to them. So cooperatives come baked in with values inherently. And I think it really kind of sets the tone for inviting new people into the company, because you can tell them, oh, I'm a worker cooperative, I'm part of a worker cooperative. And they can be like, okay, cool, you know, Googling it, and then they see something like the 7 principles come up. And they can read that and go like, oh, okay, like, you know, maybe they didn't get to talk to us specifically yet, where we can talk about how we really value like creating art that represents ourselves, right? That's one of our core values. But, you know, they can see like, oh, you know, I like this cooperation idea. I like this idea of like, you're not trying to just kind of be like siloed, working on your own. You're trying to reach out to other cooperatives and assist other people. So maybe they'll be interested. Or maybe someone will see that and be like, wow, that just doesn't politically align with me. And then they bounce off, you know? It kind of sets people's expectations, I think. I think I rambled a little bit and went past your question. My apologies.
Yeah, I mean, it's I guess is being a co-op. It sounds like being a co-op requires you to have values beyond your mind when you're, you know, definitely when you're forming the company and continually. Does it go the other way? Like, can you have values be a super vital part of your company and not be a co-op?
I think, I personally believe that if you are a group of people doing a thing, even if you don't want to call it values, you have to have something that is a foundation of understanding of one another. I think values are a really great source for that, but if you want to look at it as, what I mentioned before was like boundary setting. So it's like, I have a life and I'm not going to MMO raid every single day until we beat it, right? You know, that's a boundary you're setting. So if you don't have that, that's when you have people that are like a common thing I see with hobbyist projects, for example, is people don't have the same understanding of their goal. Maybe someone went in, all I wanted to do was learn how to do like a new 3D style. But someone else came in like, I am making a project that is going on Steam and going to make money. Those two people might get into disagreements later when it's like, I really think that you should make something that has more broad audience appeal. You're making something too niche. That probably could have been avoided with the early foundational conversation. Those two people clearly did not understand each other. They did not have the same goals, and probably ended in a lot of fights, and maybe even a ruined friendship. So I just think if you are a group of people doing something, call it values, call it boundaries, call it whatever you want. You need to understand who you are and who the people you're working with are.
I know my mind immediately jumped to like thinking of how this relates to games like design pillars on a game where you sort of have these foundational like aspects of a game that you all agree on early on, that you're like, we are not changing or deviating from these without intensive like later discussion. And if we're having disagreements, we will refer back to these as like our decision like tiebreakers, things like that.
I love that you say that, because that's actually something that kind of like at Amalur, our tagline is, your studio needs development just like a game needs development. You know, work culture doesn't just happen naturally, and if it does, it could end up toxic and terrible. You should probably have a hand in making people feel psychologically safe and making people feel that their voice matters. So that is perfect, because values directly relate to decision making. The example I gave earlier of someone's company, they weren't a cooperative. I don't actually know what their business type was, probably just an LLC. That's very common for people starting out. If they had these values set early, that would help their decision making in being like, okay, even though it would really financially help us survive, we cannot take this financial opportunity because people will just leave. People do not accept this. So same thing with design pillars of, you need to look back at what values you set, and either maybe you set them wrong. Maybe you should have another discussion and see, okay, how deeply do we hold these values? Or maybe, you know, you're going against your values and you need to figure that out. Yeah.
Is there a way to like have that conversation in a casual manner with like friends when you're just like setting up a D&D group or something, so it doesn't sound as
businessy, maybe?
Businessy, yes.
I believe it's totally possible. I inherited a raid group from a server in Discord that I'm part of, and we had a situation where basically half of the group kind of wound up leaving to go do their own thing, and so we had to kind of really come back together and be like, all right, just casual talk, like what are we looking to get out of this? What do we want from, you know, setting up this? Like, do we want to continue the raid? Do we want to stick to, like, basically the idea is like, we want to have something fun, and we have a group here that wants to have fun, but like, how far do we want to take that? Do we want to make it a regular thing? Do we make it a kind of semi-casual thing? Like, we were just talked about the casual versus mid-core versus hardcore. Just kind of like having that conversation just become part of the organic thing. The idea of like, we've got these things that we got to get through to figure out like what we can do, and we have to make sure that what we can do, we actually want to do too. I think that's actually a lot easier to get around with than just this idea of like, all right, business talk. These are the pillars. These are our what's the word that you've been using? I'm sorry.
Boundaries, maybe?
I guess boundaries is a good word for it. Yeah, like it doesn't have to take the same flavor, the same words exactly, but as long as it's kind of the same concept, the same idea of like, what do we want from this? What are we willing to commit to it? And then how can we have the most fun with it? I think that's a pretty casual conversation throughout most of it.
Yeah, and I think it helps to, you know, be honest and open to the person you're talking to, and I think that really helps things. Because if you can, you know, let yourself be vulnerable. Like for me, when I was raiding this past winter, something that I really stressed to all of the people I was with, I was like, listen, like I care a lot about doing this blind. If you don't know this, that's actually not the most common thing in MMO groups. Most people want to be able to finish it as fast as possible. They just want to use a guide that someone gave them. But I really wanted to explain to people, like, no, the fun of the game isn't the execution for me, it is the theory crafting. So I just had these like open, honest conversations with people around me being like, I care a lot about this. If you're not on the same page as me, that's okay. Like, no pressure, like you don't have to have these same like desires as me. Like I can help you find another group, or you know, if you're interested, you can join me. So I think it's just about like opening yourself up and talking about what you want, and that helps other people be like, oh, okay, like I think I want the same thing as you, or maybe they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Wasn't I doing the thing that you didn't want me to do? You know, like just being honest with people, I think helps them be honest back with you. I almost want to start bullying people. I want to hear someone new. Oh my gosh. Oh.
What's a co-op?
Thank you. I was also wondering.
Yeah. Okay. So honestly, think of it as the explanation I gave before was a business entity, but I realized that that's wrong. It's a vibe. And I'm actually completely like genuine when I'm saying that. I'm not trying to meme. It is a vibe. And the reason why I say that is because you can have a worker cooperative even within an LLC, right? What makes a worker cooperative is this document called like your bylaws. And basically it's just your agreement where you're like, this is how people become members. This is how profits are distributed. This is like saying that we don't allow outside investors to have votes in the company. So it's just having those like things written down in a document, and then you have to then live those values. The reason why I specify that too is because I feel like people want to say that worker cooperatives, that's our solution to like worker exploitation. And it's like, what if you have a worker cooperative that is denying membership of everyone and is only letting like a few key members to stay? You know, like, I don't think it's the end all be all solution. I think you have to live to those standards, which is why I say, at the end of the day, it is a vibe. I hope that helps and that wasn't just a silly explanation.
Earlier you had mentioned that, did I interrupt somebody? No? Okay. Earlier you had mentioned that your value setting is an ongoing conversation. What does that look like?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, earlier you had mentioned that your value setting is an ongoing conversation, like you didn't just establish the values.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Initially, you like are still constantly talking about those values. What does that look like? What does that?
Yeah, so we just sort of like, we set up like a Miro board, and we just sort of check in with ourselves. Basically, we just sort of do the exercise again and see if it differs from what we did in the past. So specifically, what we do is we set up it's almost easier to think of it as like outcomes or goals too. We set up like short-term, medium, and long-term, and we just think like, okay, let's say one of our values is like true collaboration. Maybe short-term is learning about each other's skill interests, right? Medium term is helping each other foster those skills, and long term maybe is like, you know, properly creating a project where you know, you get to use those like new skills that you fostered together. You know, like maybe like you really value like learning in this collaborative like group. And it's like, oh wait, we actually didn't really focus on it like that in the past. You know, we would talk about how people's voices matter, but we didn't really focus on like peer-to-peer education or whatever. So then we can investigate that and be like, is that a value of ours? Can that be incorporated in another way? So yeah, it's just like, I think it's like a yearly like check-in with ourselves on the idea. And especially, it can come sooner if we hire someone new. Because a way of culture check, making sure that like we are on the same page, and also seeing like if they have anything new to introduce.
What were some of the decisions that you made throughout that were maybe more like, or how does it making decisions for like a business versus say like a raid group or a like an art project that you're working on with people? How did the business aspect of it specifically impact some of your worker co-ops decisions?
I'll be honest, like I kind of approach it all the same. Like it feels the same for me.
Nice.
So when I approach like a decision on like what project to make, I look at those pillars we established and I try and base like, okay, like yes, we should work on this project, or no, like this isn't really going along with like what we're trying to go for. And you know, I do the same thing with like a raid group of like, okay, we established we're doing this blind and that we're doing this by X date or whatever. You know, I look at what's coming up. It's like, oh, actually, we're on a time crunch. How much are we holding on to the value of doing it blind? So eventually, near the end of the raid season, we actually did drop it, even though I cared a lot about that. Like, I freaking love theory crafting in games. It's my favorite thing ever. I don't want someone to tell me what to do, because I feel like, well, now I don't get to make my own decisions. But, you know, I looked at the fact that we were losing time before the next expansion came out. So, honestly, same thing I would do at work, of like, oh, like, we're not really doing X thing anymore. How deeply do we hold that value still, or whatever? I hope that was clear.
Yeah, totally.
New voice, new voice.
Take your forward.
That'll go great.
So are there any difficulties that you've run into or you've seen in other co-ops that are kind of unique to being a co-op? And I'm thinking compared to a regular corporation, so I'm thinking, I know I've heard stories, I wouldn't say Valve Software is a co-op, but they had an experience of like, you know, there's no explicit hierarchy, but in place of that you get a bunch of implicit hierarchy, which is kind of worse. Or similarly, like I'm imagining, you know, when you're a co-op or a regular company, if you have a, for lack of a better term, like a troublesome employee, that's much easier to deal with than a troublesome co-owner. And so I was curious, you know, have you run into issues specific to being a co-op, and how have you worked through them?
I think the important thing to distinguish here is that a cooperative doesn't have to be different from another company when it comes to the day-to-day operations of your business. So I'm just going to talk about games because that's what we're all here for. So you can have a cooperative that still has the traditional hierarchy of like, you have your senior developer, you have a junior developer, you have like X and Y like people. Like you can still have that traditional like setup and the traditional structure. And then it's just on the business side, if they are an equal business owner, you know, when it comes to those like top level decisions, that's when it's more flat. Aside from, you do have like a board of directors still who are in charge of particular tasks. So it's really like not that different. Like you can have your day-to-day operations work the same exact way. So Valve's flat hierarchy, you can do that. My experience is kind of rough doing it like that. And I think Valve has had a hard time getting projects off the ground that way too. I think I've heard interviews with people where it's like, it feels impossible to like get something like done and out the door because people can just like kind of like gravitate to whatever they want and they can drop whatever they want. So that's like, or they have issues with like, subtle, like unwritten, like hierarchies start to develop despite the fact that it's written that it's no hierarchies. So then people have more like social political power within the company and therefore can use that power to like kind of get their way or whatever. So you can have it be like that and be a cooperative, or you can have it be a more traditional structure. It doesn't really affect things like that.
I can speak a little bit to have like removing an employee when you're like in a co-op. I work at a co-op myself, and a year or some back, there was some information that we learned about an employee, and we had a conversation about that. and how we felt about this employee now that we have all this new information. It was not good. And we just had a stark conversation about it. Like, we spent a few days like reflecting on it by ourselves, like individually. And then we came back and we had a meeting about it without this person initially, to discuss like how we felt about all of this. And it was a stark conversation that folks had to have. And not everybody necessarily had skin in the game, so they didn't necessarily speak up about like the specifics of what they wanted to talk about, but or of the employee we're talking about here. But yeah, it was valuable to have that conversation and feel like we were in a space where we could have that conversation. Whereas like in other places, you might have employees who are abusing such and such systems, and you don't really have a system established to like have a conversation about that with people. So it's good that like as a co-op we have that system in place. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge there's a difference between responsibility and accountability. And accountability is not baked into any business. You might think it is, like, oh, if you're a CEO, you have this responsibility. But, you need to make sure to have processes in place to hold yourself and others accountable. And it's not baked into workers' cooperatives, and it's not baked into LLCs. We have someone new. Run, Stephen, run.
What? Oh.
If only there were a camera.
Why'd you make me run then?
Does this work? Does. There's a mic the whole time. So I was curious, like when you said hiring, I'm just having a little trouble imagining how this all works. When you hire someone, you are agreeing as a group to let this person in, and then they become an owner. Does it involve, like, do you pay people? Like, is money exchanged at any point? Or is it all, like, is it intrinsic things, or does it just depend on the group on what you get out of it, and how that works, like, just from a structure standpoint?
Yeah, okay. So I will say that if you wanted to create a cooperative or like turn an LLC into a cooperative, that information is in your bylaws. Your bylaws is like your Bible. Like it's so important to like agree on everything and just like get on the same page. So for Amalur, we agreed that the idea of becoming a full member, which is becoming an equal business owner, is that you need to work full time for 6 months. And then once that is done, you may submit an application to become a member, which is honestly just like a written like, hey, I want to do this. And then the current board reviews that, votes, and then that person becomes a member if there is a super majority of people that say yes. That's just all in our bylaws. So before that, they're just sort of like an ordinary employee. They're not a business owner yet, so they're just, salaried, hourly. It's up to the organization how they do it. I've heard of people, if you don't have current profits or revenue, you do rev share agreements, although Amalur, we don't do that. But once they become a member, if you have written in your bylaws that, I'm just gonna throw out random numbers here. So once a year, you distribute 10% of the profits to the current business owners. They're just adding it into that pool. So now they get that portion, however it's split up, however many people there are. And then to make it more complicated, we have specific, it's based off of number of hours worked. And actually one of our values is that we don't do crunch. We want to have healthy lives and take care of ourselves. We very explicitly want to kind of avoid recreating that industry-wide like problem. So as part of our bylaws is we set full-time hours at 35 hours a week. If you work over that amount, it does not mean you get a greater share of profits later. It is capped at 35 hours a week. So it's basically a way to discourage people from crunching themselves and overworking themselves with the idea of like, oh, if I do this, like, if we get like, if we have profits this year, I'm gonna get more of it. Like, we don't wanna do that. Like, we're not here to work people to the bone. We want people to take care of themselves. So that's one way that we actually have our values written into our bylaws.
I'll just ask this to be, devil's advocate. I like money. Why would I let someone become an owner? If, like, let's say there's 10 owners and I'm one of them, I get 10% of that money. Like, why would I want another owner? Like, let's just hire somebody to do the work.
All I have to say to that is exactly. That's why I don't think like, oh, you're a worker, like, don't assume if someone's like, oh, I'm a worker cooperative. Don't assume that they aren't recreating the problems that have persisted within our industry. It's only if people actually live and work up to their values. So the one way that I can see working against that, if you are concerned that someone is kind of having that more greedy mindset, is having something explicitly written into your bylaws. It's actually something I'm considering bringing up at Amalur, but I'm not sure if we want to do that yet. We are considering making it so like, we do not hire people without having that like membership like pipeline. That if we eventually say no, either we have to be open to like working out some agreement with them. We're like, okay, well this is why we're not comfortable being like having you be a full member. And either, we end the agreement right then and there, like, okay, sorry, like I don't think we'll work out. Or we have some sort of way to like help facilitate them becoming full members later on and helping whatever skills that they are like lacking and building those skills up. So that is something I actively think about and something I always tell people because I've heard people say like, worker cooperatives are a revolution. Revolution, you're a business owner. You're petit bourgeois. What revolution comes from the petit bourgeois? So it's just kind of like, I think you need to recognize what position you're in and understand that you hold power over these people who are not members yet. So I love that because it matches with my very cynical mindset.
I mean, I got more cynical questions if we want some. Steven sort of touched it, but I don't quite understand. Like, how would you remove an owner? Like, it's in the bylaws, but like, what is like a common way that, like, is like, how does Amalur, like, if somebody stops working, like, let's say I'm in a co-op with 9 of my friends, and I just decide to, like, stop working or stop, fulfilling the values of the company. What are actual ways that co-ops deal with that?
Yeah, I'm going to give a boring answer first, then I'll say that what Amalur does. So the boring answer is that you talk to a lawyer. We actually had lawyers that are experts in this, particularly making bylaws for worker cooperatives. So they already knew the answer to those questions. They helped us create clauses that we can utilize later on to help remove people or avoid what you just described, actually. Actually, we have an explicit rule of, I believe it is, we have this very generous, just because this is our mindset. If this sounds crazy to you, don't worry, you don't have to do it. You can do something completely different. But we have it in our bylaws where if someone is basically MIA for a year, their membership is automatically dissolved and their employee status is automatically removed. So you can have it be way shorter than that. It doesn't have to be that generous. It's just something that we really deeply care about at Amalur, of treating people as people. And sometimes that means a horrible mental crisis where you're just not doing so hot for maybe even up to a year, right? But maybe you have different values, and that's totally okay. You can value like, you know, wanting to like keep the boat running and like stay together, even despite hardships. So, yeah, I hope that like that answers part of it. In terms of just like removing people, it's a lot more complicated. I would have to actually probably pull up our bylaws to give you specifics, but you know, there is a process there of like written intent, meetings, votes, and then like hearing a plea from the person that remove, and then another vote. It's something along those lines. I want to hear some value setting stories. Does anyone have any fun collaboration stories? Maybe horror stories, wholesome stories? Ooh, okay, we got a hand.
Y'all want to hear about the time I lost an entire D&D group?
Oh no, yeah. Tell us.
So, I lived in Twin Cities for most of my life. I went down to Indiana for college. One of the things that we tried to do with this D&D group is we tried to do online sessions. But it turns out that for us, online sessions were just absolute nightmares. None of us were trusting each other to roll dice. None of us were trusting each other to report any accuracies. We tried using Roll20 and just had an absolute nightmare time. So we sat down, we had a conversation about like what we can do to increase trust and things like that. I recommended like, you know, cameras on, you know, like show your dice rolls, or use like a generated system and then log it. And none of us could really agree. So we kind of just decided to stop having it.
Probably for the best than to have a blowout later.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is that setting values doesn't mean that's going to be sunshine and roses. Maybe you have this conversation that you're really excited to work with someone. You have that conversation and you find out that you are just not compatible with this person. It's a blessing, you know. You didn't put in hours and hours of work working with someone that like you just actually don't agree with. You got to avoid all that. Maybe you avoided spending money, you know, like it is a blessing, although it may hurt. So it's easy to try to avoid these conversations, but it's better to get them out of the way.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now that I'm back in the Twin Cities, of course everyone else has left the Twin Cities. So we're all still friends. We just haven't played D&D in somewhere close to a decade, I think, at this point.
Maybe someday, maybe.
Well, the closest we've gotten was Baldur's Gate 3.
I guess I'll yap again. Hello, everybody.
I love it when you yap.
Oh, thank you. An experience I had with like setting values amongst a team was I graduated from Stout last year and was I've been continuing development with the rest of my team on the game that we did as our senior capstone project, and it's called Grape Juice City. There's a playable version on Steam. Check it out. As we were like continuing development on it, we had to like some of our first meetings were sit-down conversations of, okay, are we bringing this current game to fruition and then like hands off? Are we doing a revamp? And then as well with that, we had a lot of discussion about like what our expectations were for each other. And since it's like basically all volunteered free time, we came to an agreement that like anytime you're available to give is like more than enough. With everybody else working other jobs, it's more of a like do as you're able to kind of like activity, and through that sort of influenced our goal setting of our estimate on like when we want releases to be. That is like, unless funding comes in, we are expecting to release it when we release it, like worrying less about the deadline for it and ensuring that like as long as the work is fulfilling and sustainable for everybody, that like we're still gonna soldier on through it until we get it done, unless any other circumstances change with it.
Yeah, that's great. Did you have any complicated conversations? Was there anyone that was like not flowing with that, or was it pretty much unanimous agreement?
I would say like of the original team, there was definitely a significant amount who have like had other priorities, which is entirely understandable, and we had made
yeah,
that a
yeah.
very clear thing. Like, there is no like pressure to continue on this project as long as we have like enough people sticking with it. We will continue development on it. But we tried, at least I tried at the beginning to make it very clear that like you only have to do this if this is something you want to do. And let's see here, what was another? Like, we made sure to leave it as like an open discussion as well, or like you're able to opt out at any point, like if the work is getting like draining or if like circumstances in your life come up, there's no like pressure or shame in saying, hey, I need to step back from this project either like temporarily or indefinitely. Because I don't know, I only, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of like a conversation we had with it, because we wanted to make sure that we were making something because we were excited about it, instead of just like, you know, the peer pressure of like everybody else, like, hey, do my thing for me, you know, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, that sounds great. I love that.
So I have a values setting example from my D&D group. Before we
Oh my God,
started
yes, D&D.
meeting, our DM sent out a lovely little sheet that had like a list of all the things that could possibly come up in the campaign, and if there was anything that we didn't want to address as a group. Like spiders was on the list too. Like, it's not just like hardcore like sexual assault or anything like that. It was like little things like, do you like snakes? And I really appreciated it, because it was like the first time that someone had listed out all of the things that I could possibly think somebody might have a problem with. And if anybody said yes, it just wasn't in the campaign.
Yeah, I've seen that sheet a lot, and I think it's a really, really good direction that modern D&D like people are like going with. I actually had a problem with that, funny enough. Our DM was wonderful, you know, checked in with all of us. Like even we had someone in our group that had like an OCD issue with like wrists. So they made sure to avoid violence to wrist were never going to happen. Like, there was no description of slit wrist, there's no description of someone losing their hand. Very specific, but like wonderful. But where it fell apart is that they didn't check in with themselves. So some of the players started making like sex jokes or whatever, and then that like got them to like shut down completely. So, you know, something to think about. You know, if you're doing that, watch out for yourself too. Like, your own boundaries matter just as much as the players do, and let them know what lines that you don't want to cross and what you don't want to facilitate for them.
I got more.
Hell yeah.
So for those who don't know me, I worked on Fingence, this game called Fingence. It's a side-scrolling shoot 'em up, cooperative side-scrolling shoot 'em up. You can get it on itch right now. But
Penguin's the
thanks,
best.
Dale.
Penguin's the best character. Gwen.
Yes, Gwen.
Gwen.
I was about to get to that. Okay, so
Heckler in the audience, please leave Steven alone.
yeah, so I worked on it for 7 years. And I think at the beginning, we didn't really establish any kinds of values or anything like that, right? Because I think we just wanted to work on a game. The value was we wanted to work on a game. At least
Yeah,
that
I
was
think
what
that's
we
for a lot of
communi-
people. Yeah, you're not alone, for sure.
Yeah, that's what we communicated. But as we started working on it for longer, and this game became more of a commitment, we established we had more conversations about what we wanted from this game. And so like we had those conversations, and I don't think our values exactly, it's not that our values did not align, it's that they were more like in tandem with one another. They worked together, even though they weren't necessarily the exact same types of values. And so like we did that for a while too, and it worked out because we had to establish those values. But as time went on, and really partly to like the pandemic started, or the pandemic started, and it kind of also threw things out of whack. We didn't spend I think anyways, personally, I think we didn't spend as much time establishing values as frequently as maybe we should have, and so like we ended up like getting to a place where the game still is great, in my opinion. But I think that like the completion of it, I think maybe wasn't as monumentous as I would have liked it to have been, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly why I say that, like, it is an ongoing conversation. You should never think of your values as settled. It's like, think of you as a person. How many times have you changed over the years? How many times have you gained new opinions, maybe even completely opposite from what you used to hold? If you acknowledge that you yourself are an ever-changing individual, then you need to acknowledge the people you're working with are ever-changing individuals, and you need to have check-ins with each other. I think also, like, part of the problem that can come up with moments like that is you're not being honest with yourself sometimes. You're just like, this is fine. I can accept this. And it's like, no, 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 no. Do not just accept things. Be open to your problems and be like, okay, I know this is what I said in the past, but I'm starting to feel differently about this. Like, it's starting to make me feel uncomfortable, or maybe it's like, I want to do more, or I want something more to come of this. And I think that's totally fine.
I think that's why we eventually just like put the game out, because we were tired of working on it for 7 years and we just needed to stop.
You know
also,
what?
there was
That could be a value.
and there was a pandemic, and we already were working in video games already, so it was just like, this is a thing we want. We just need to get out so we could move on. So that's kind of where we ended up. No, we're still friends, Dale. One of them is
Friendship.
my brother. You know that, right? I know that. Okay, Dale knows
Friendship broken.
Dale,
Never talking again.
Do you have a value story you want to talk about? No. Okay. I wasn't trying to call you out. Now it sounded like I was calling you out, and I didn't mean to do that. Oh, okay. Thanks, Dale.
So Steven's heckler is still here, unfortunately.
Uh-huh.
Surprised security hasn't dragged them out yet. Oh no, the heckler
How do
has
you
a
feel
mic.
about your brother?
You'd have to ask him.
Someone responds, how does your brother feel about you?
You'd have to ask him. I don't know.
Obviously, you need more check-in sessions.
True. I mean, I guess
True.
it applies to families. Like, if we're going to take that in a serious manner, you should also check in with your family to make sure that you're all on the up and up. Families and friends.
Oh, unironically, like completely. The blow-ups that I've had with my family, I feel like could have been solved with earlier conversations of just like, hey, this is starting to upset me, or hey, I'm starting to feel about this. But unfortunately, while it's easy for me to like, I'm collaborating with someone, I'm playing games with someone, I'm gonna be open and honest. Family, nah. No, I'm the dog meme. This is fine, everything's fine, and I'm going to be strong and friendly for my family. It's rough. It's rough out there.
I guess in a different direction, I'm curious, like, if you guys have had any like challenges throughout like your experience of Amalur, and if you have any like anecdotes with like how you managed to navigate that, or how you guys managed to come to a resolution about that, and like if there are any like bits of advice that you guys had from those experiences.
Oh yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice I have for like, I guess I'm gonna say handling conflict between, or like interpersonal conflict issues is, I think there's like two parts to it. The first part is you need to understand one another. So we actually did eventually have a conversation like, look, tell me, you as a person, how do you react to these things? So one of our co-members, what they described to me was when they start to get frustrated, they're the kind of person they have to walk away. They can't immediately deal with it. They can't immediately like address it. They need a break. They need to walk away and address things later. So that's actually something that they brought up, because that was a problem that we were having, that once we walked away, we were really bad about coming back to conversations, because we would view like, oh, meeting minutes, that was done. We talked about this. Story's over. But this person never got the chance to like emotionally process their frustration and never got the chance to talk about it later because we didn't know that that's how they worked. You know, sometimes with like, I'm like a fixer person. I try not to be if my friends ask for advice because I know that's terrible when it's like, oh, hey, have you fixed your problems that you're talking to me about? So, you know, context is important. But I am of that mindset of like, I'm like, okay, is there a problem? I'm going to work on it right now. We're going to talk about it and we will figure something out. And that obviously doesn't align with this other person. So we came up with an agreement where it's like, okay, we will check in on old topics no matter what. We just want to check in on how people are feeling, if there's any new updates, any new thoughts. We don't just like let conversations die just because, oh, we talked about it and it's over. So I think that's one part of it. The other part is understanding why a conflict is happening. So you need to address, is it an ego issue? And by ego, is it like someone is feeling like their voice and their expertise is maybe being undervalued. Maybe their work is being stepped on. I've seen another cooperative talk about their senior engineer basically had someone new start a system with programming, and it started to cause some friction there because they were starting to have an ego problem of like, this coding stuff is my baby, like you're touching my baby. So acknowledging, is it an ego issue or is there some deeper like issue that's happening with our values? So just like, you know, figuring out like, what is this issue, why is it happening? And that can really help you address it too. Because if it's an issue with our values, like if we're performing some action within our cooperative that goes against our values, like let's say, I'm trying to think of an example. This is hard because this hasn't happened to us yet. A lot of our issues tend to be related to ego. And I know for me, like I can feel that problem with like, I'm the producer, and I can feel threatened when people are like, okay, well let's rework the schedule. Because I'm like, did I make it wrong the first time? What do you mean rework the schedule? But you know, it's something I need to let go. Like other people can have their input and like have their concerns. I might have to get back to you on a values example. It's really hard. I guess the only thing I can think of is like, we care about environmentalism. So if we started to work with a company that was not environmentally friendly at all, maybe that's something that would like come up in like a conflict moment of like, hey, like I'm really starting to have a problem that we have this business partnership with someone. And that would be a conflict based on values. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, I have one thing to say about just kind of a tactic or a strategy for ego problems, and it's called the put the other person in the okay chair. So it's, yeah, you're looking at me like, what the heck?
It is a very funny name.
Essentially, it's talking around a problem and saying like, you know, essentially like, I see why you made that mistake or have that opinion, but here's something you don't know about. It's making them come from, yeah, you're okay. What you thought was okay. Here's something you didn't know about, making them not be in the wrong chair. They're in the okay chair. If that made sense. But I find it really helpful, and we had a company. I worked for a company that talked about it off and on, but I could see when people did it to me, and then I was like, you're putting me in the okay chair, and it feels pretty good here because you're not being attacked. It's a way to bring down that level of defensiveness and just kind of talk through it from the beginning.
Yeah, that is so important. And like with ego issues, people's defense can be on high because they could feel that something is an attack on them directly. What I just said about like, what do you mean you're making a new schedule? Wasn't the first one I made perfect? How dare you?
I had a project manager who said that a schedule is worth the paper that it's written on because
that's amazing, yes.
Just with how quickly things can change, you still need it, but it's not going to be accurate, 5 minutes past when it's written up sometimes. And so it's not you made a bad schedule, it's everything around you changed.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Talking about bad schedules, I worked for a con down in Indiana for 1 year. It was a senior like capstone kind of thing. They spent all year planning like a conference. It was going to be an anime themed conference. They'd done all this work to go ahead and like make sure it all worked. And then the weekend before, about 3/4 of the people that they had contacted to do like panels and stuff like that backed out. So yeah, a schedule is never worth more than the willingness to somehow make it work.
So there's a question on YouTube.
Oh, heck yes. Let's go.
It says, it's from Mr. Gaff, and we miss you tonight, Scott.
Oh my God. I don't know if you remember me, Gaff, but I love the energy he brings, for sure.
Oh, see, you're missed.
You're missed.
The question is, has the IGDATC board had any value discussions like we're talking about? And first,
Ooh.
I would like to pose it to the community. What do you think? Have we had discussions?
I
see
hope
a
so.
Couple yes, no.
Yes.
Oh, Steven still has a mic.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, of course we have them, and we have them regularly. I guess if you go to the website, which I'm going to do right now, I think that we kind of have our basic mission, which is learn, connect, and achieve. IGDATC provides continuing education and career development for a growing inclusive community of designers, artists, programmers, everyone involved in any part of the development of video games and tabletop games in the Minneapolis, St. Paul metro area and surrounding regions. So it's very important for us to include tabletop, digital, and anyone who's interested. It's not like you have to have a level of proficiency to attend our meetings and join our community. We have been making strides, I think, with adding additional events and increasing our special interest groups to try and make it a more welcoming community for folks. But we are always open for feedback, just we don't get a lot. So if you have any questions or concerns or suggestions for us, please email us at igdatwincities@gmail.com.
Or in the meta discussion channel on our Discord as a secondary avenue if you're interested in making it more of a public, hey, how do people in the community feel about this? It's a great avenue for positing how other people feel about things so that we can know what things to add, change, do more of, do less of, etc.
I'm interested. Is there any things that you can point to where how your values have evolved over the years of the organization existing?
I'm new here. I can't.
Yeah, I'm just gonna describe the physical comedy of Sam just now, just being literally.
I don't know what you're talking about. Sam is extremely elegant. I can speak to that, and it's a slow process, but we had a pivot point a couple of years ago. I don't know if people would recognize it exactly because the impact is slow, but we decided that it was important for us to grow the community and the types of people in the community because we felt as a board that we didn't want to get comfortable with the success we had. Everyone's having a great time. People feel really happy, but we're seeing the same people every week. We're not growing. We're not building. And it didn't mean anything was wrong. It just meant that it wasn't what we wanted the org to be. And the steps we took to change that were immediate, but also small. And then the impact is slow and ongoing. Am I describing that correctly, fellow board members? But it is something at every board meeting, it's it hangs over us because the moment we stop taking it seriously, the moment we'll trick ourselves into thinking we're doing a great job. And because it is hard to provide feedback, like Beth says, we don't get a lot of it, but I get why. We have to keep ourselves accountable to those values because we are all also individually very busy people.
No, yeah, that's real. I almost feel like, so maybe this is a future talk, because this isn't exactly value related, although it is in a way. But I was recently introduced to the concept of social impact frameworks. And oh boy, if I thought that value setting took a long time, oh, am I wrong now that I'm going through this? Now this is taking an immensely long time to work out. And it's a really straightforward concept. It's you just think about the outcomes of your activities and what you're doing and what you want those outcomes to be. And then tied with it, there is this measurement framework where the idea is that you are constantly tracking data on each possible outcome. So you need to write the outcome in such a way where it's trackable. You can't just say like, things are great now. How do you track that? How do you know things are great? How do you like get data on that? So the idea is just like to help with that data collection. You should have me thinking about it. And I'll connect it to values by saying you probably have your outcomes based on your values. Like one of our values at Amalur is uplifting and assisting like marginalized people. And one of our activities that we really focus on is mentorship of marginalized people trying to enter the industry. And we are starting to work on a social impact framework for that and how to start tracking that. Let me tell you, surveys are amazing. Force people to take them. You get so much information.
nicegames.club/feedback.
Yes, Stephen.
Had to do it.
I'm sure a lot of people know, but for context, Stephen.
I do a podcast.
Yes.
It's called Nice Games Club.
Mm-hmm. And you are the feedback man.
Yes. Give me feedback, please.
It's a good role to have. It's important to try to get that information because if you don't like have a plan in place to seek it out, it can be really hard to understand if you are achieving the goals that you set out to achieve. And we're realizing that at Amalur. Like, we have all these lofty ideas, but it's like, how would we actually get this ball rolling? And this has been really, really helping us understand how to do it and how to track the progress of those outcomes. I can start bullying people. I'm very good at it. I'm from New Jersey. I don't care about Minnesotan like politeness. I will be blunt. I will be scary. No, it's okay. I'm a soft marshmallow. I'm not that scary. Is there anything that people like are thinking about with like maybe any collaborations they're trying to do? Something that you're thinking about doing? You have done?
Might I suggest that if people have things that are personal, maybe it's a good opportunity to talk about that when we all get together after the meeting.
That's true too.
One of my values is food.
For people on stream, Steven's heckler says that one of their values is food. It's okay, I'm keeping your identity, like, I'm not saying your name.
Slightly obscured.
Yeah, it's slightly obscured, no one knows.
I'm sorry, based off that phrasing, are you saying that the heckler is saying that one of Steven's values is food? Or
it's
that
one of my
Steven's
values.
heckler's value is food?
The heckler's value is food.
It can be
Thank
two
you for
things.
clarification.
Okay.
But yeah, on the subject of keeping on talking afterwards at food, I have to say it was kind of audacious to ask folks on a live streamed video to share their experiences about trust issues and communication with people they've worked with. Like, some folks had examples, but I'm sure there are other examples that people couldn't share. Just putting that
for
out
sure.
there.
No. I'm joking about putting pressure on people. Or am I?
They are.
No, I am. Steven,
I already knew.
how dare you speak for me?
You said it right when I said it.
No, yeah, it is. It is not. Even just the value setting conversation is really. It's personal. It's difficult. It's not an easy thing, and I don't want to suggest it is an easy solution to avoid all conflict. Because even with setting your values, there will be conflict. We are people. We change or we don't change, and that's okay at the end of the day. We can definitely call it quits if no one else has anything. YouTube, I'll check Discord.
Is there any further questions in the YouTube stream that we see? No? All right, I think we should stop the stream then. Thanks everybody for tuning in tonight.
Woo woo.
And then we will continue our celebrations at a place that has one of our core values of food.
Yeah, core value at IGATC, food.
Skittles
here,
are our second
folks.
best fruit.
Okay, so